Grahtwood Lore, Part 1. Arubic Enigma 4, The Elden Tree. Inscribed by Beradalmo the Signifier. Here is a truth read from the bark. The spike of Adamantina and its zero stone dictated the structure of reality in its arubic vicinity, defining for the earthbones their story or nature within the unfolding of the dragon's time-bound tale. The Eldmeri or Mytheric elves were singular of purpose only so long as it took them to realize that other towers, with their own stones, could tell different stories, each following rules inscribed by Varium architects. And so the Mer self-refracted, each to their own creation, the Kaimer following Red Heart, the Bosmer burgeoning Greensap, the Ultima erecting crystal-like lore, Italia. But of all the prismatic Mer, none were more presumptuous than the Ayleids of the Heartland. They built their tower in open emulation of Adamantina, using as a founding stone the great red diamond they had uncovered, Kaim el Abdal, said to be the crystallized blood from the heart of Lorcan itself. For the heart, on its arrow, passed over the Heartlands, birthing one of those postnymic quaternary meanings. Thus did white gold become Tower 1, as all know. As foretold by the moth-eyed, Ayleid hubris was to bear bitter fruit. With their vision on high to behold the overworlds, they failed to note the seething needlings at their feet, until the thralls rose up and took their tower away from them. Kaim et Abdal they took as well, but not before the Archmaid Anumeral fangled an 8-fold staff of towers, each segment a semblance of a tower in its dance. And then 7 of these segments were borne by white gold knights to distant fold places where they were hidden. This was all unknown to Pelin et Essia, be certain, or there might have been a different 8 divines. Thus white gold. On to Greensap. The Biosh elves were of the Earthbones who most hearkened to Geoffrey and his green songs. They did not build a tower, they grew it, a great Graht Oak, whose roots sprang from a perchance acorn. And this was their stone. And because the acorn might perchance have been elsewhere, thus was Greensap manifold and several, and each could walk. Therefore each Greensap was also every Greensap. Within each were all told the stories of the green, with every ending true. So doors therein were not always doors certain, but this to the Biosh become Bosmer became inured, and indeed grew to relish those doors equivocal, for such was their nature in the schism of the prism. In this way the Bosmer learned which songs made the trees dance, and which dances they might do. Now return we must to the 8th segment, or rather, segment 1, for a numeral had fangled it in similitude to Tower 1, which itself reflected Tower 0. When the Ayleids fled the Heartland, they went to all 8 corners of the compass, and this was a chosen thing, though many corners spelled doom. But more Ayleids fled to Valenwood than to all the other directions combined, and this too was chosen. Among these clans went a numeral, wearing segment 1 as a femur, for how but by walking can a spoke advance its hub? Greensap's elves welcomed the Ayleids so long as the Heartlanders agreed not to dissonate the green song. All agreed to this, save a numeral, who coughed into his hand unnoticed. He asked the great Camoran to show him Greensap, and was brought to one that by happenstance stood then in Eldenroot. Once within the great Graht, he passed through a door equivocal, and found his desire, the perchance acorn. It was one of many, but for a numeral, one was enough. Next, the fanglement. A numeral brought forth segment 1 among the roots and showed it to the golden nut, and this told an ending, so that the stone became a definite acorn. That elden tree would not walk again, but a numeral yet had further intentions for it. Using his dentition as tonal instruments, he dismantled his bones and built of them a mundus machine that mirrored Nirn and its planets. And when he had used all his substance in fangling this orrery, he placed the segment scepter within, hiding it between the moons. Then he waited, but what he waited for did not eventuate, and perchance he's waiting yet. For a numeral had hoped to convert Greensap into white gold, and thereby make the Heartlander's realm anew. However, a numeral did not know, and was not yet able to know, why his plan went awry. You see, ayleid magic is about will, and shall, and must, but under Greensap, all is perchance. The ayleid fangler's plan could not succeed, and yet neither could it fail, for this is a story that has not yet found its ending. Ayleid Survivals in Valenwood by Kiranir of Cloudrest, 4th tier scholar of Tamrielic Minutiae. This report was commissioned by the Thalmor Committee of Alliance Relations to investigate whether there might be indoctrinational advantage in emphasizing the Ayleid lineage woven into the bloodlines of our cousins the Wood Elves. My extensive travels in Valenwood have enabled me to determine the historical facts behind the matter. Whether these facts can support a useful campaign promoting Alliance fellowship is up to the committee and the Sapiarch of Indoctrination. As Pluribel of Dusk has noted in her magisterial Collapse of the Ayleids, blame for the White Gold catastrophe of First Era 243 can be attributed to half a dozen disastrous factors, all of which the bloody insurrection by the indentured human labourers may not be the most important. Pluribel emphasizes, quite rightly in my belief, the Nar-Fincel schism of the late Metheric era, which pitted more conservative Aedra-worshipping Ayleid clans against those decadent yet undeniably vigorous clans that had adopted Daedra worship. This conflict reached its climax in First Era 198, at the scouring of Wendenberg, when King Glinferin of Altar led a combined force of Daedrophile warriors against the traditionalist Barbasex of Ayleidun. The Barbasex were driven out of the Heartland into northwest Argonia, and thereafter organized opposition to Daedra worship in Cyrodiil was effectively over. In any event, by most measures, Ayleid civilization had been in decline for several generations by the time White Gold Tower fell, to the savagery of the Needs. Standing amid the ruins of a great elven culture, the victors concocted a justification for the blood on their hands by painting the defeated clans as vicious Daedrophiles who revelled in torture and cruelty. An exception was made for those clans, mainly Aedric adherents, who had thrown in their lot with the hordes of the Slave Queen. Of course, this only delayed their extermination, for the barbarous Needs inevitably came after their former allies, once the other elves of Cyrodiil had been hunted into extinction. Thus began the Ayleid diaspora, in which the Heartland elves sought to find new homes elsewhere in Tamriel. To decidedly mixed success, those who fled north into the lands once held by the Falmer were slaughtered by the Nords, led by the infamous Vagre the Butcher. The Barbasex, by that time well established in Argonia, refused admittance to their former persecutors, the Atarics, and most of that clan died on an ill-fated expedition to the lands of the Catmen. Several clans set out on the long march through Hammerfell to the Iliac Bay, and some actually made it, where they joined with and were absorbed by the long-established Direni of Balfira. Most successful, and they were more than a few, were the clans that fled southwest beneath the canopy of Valenwood. These clans of Antwil, Vilvern, Tanwike, Bourne, and Varondo all largely escaped intact to carve out a new life under the trees. These clans all worshipped Daedric princes, but they seem to have done so with less fervor after their enforced migration to Valenwood, possibly due to the fact that the princes, when called upon, had offered little or no help to the Forsaken clans. Fortunately, their new hosts, the Bosmer, were remarkably generous in welcoming the Ayleids into their realm, so long as the Heartland elves agreed to adopt aspects of the Green Pact and refrain from harming the forest. Having little choice, the Ayleids agreed, and this probably contributed to the dilution of their culture. For diluted it was, absorbed over time, and eventually forgotten. I have walked the great Ayleid ruins of Valenwood, Hectorheim, Rillanul's Fall, Beltara, Leiloria, and a dozen more, and none of them, not one, was still occupied only 2,000 years after the diaspora. For some reason, once the Ayleids were under the great Graht Oaks, they and their distinctive culture simply melted away. In explaining the extinction of the Valenwood Ayleids, my predecessor, Gilgarad the Velespid, was very attached to his theorem of disheritage, which held that for some reason the forest Ayleids became unable to breed with each other and could only generate offspring by mating with the local Bosmer. This would certainly account for the Ayleids' gradual disappearance, but unfortunately Gilgarad's theorem is supported only by old stories and legends, and absent facts it cannot be proven. It is worth mentioning here that the competing theory of Dr. Thetsis of the Shimmerine Academy. Her explanation blames Ayleid decline on overconsumption of the unusually potent beverages of the Bosmer. Dr. Thetsis believes the Ayleids, vulnerable in their grief over their losses, fell prey to the Wood Elves' paralyzing brews, and simply gave up trying. In this they may have been encouraged by the Bosmer themselves, who often seemed insulted by others' displays of industrious effort. And what did our forest-dwelling cousins learn from the Ayleids? Precious little, apparently, other than some advanced techniques of stonework and masonry. Heartland elven culture seems to have made little lasting impression on the culture of the Wood Elves. Their attitude seems to me summed up by the statement of Fallenlore, the Yorthane of the Elden Root, whose response when I asked him about the Ayleids was as follows. The Ayleids, oh yes, nice fellows, took themselves too seriously though, and what did it get them? Common Arms of Valenwood by Mistral Aurelian Terescor. Metal weapons have never been widespread in Valenwood. The Wood Elves' Green Pact prescribes the use of wood to kindle forge fires, though in some areas the burning of peat or coal can get kilns up to metal forging temperatures. Other Bosmer make do with bone clubs or use axes and spears with blades of stone or obsidian. In the coastal towns such as Haven and Port Valen, Bosmeri swordsmanship has benefited from the tutelage of the Altmer advisors and a reliable supply of imported metal weapons. Strangely, the High Elves are not similarly appreciative of the Bosmer composite horn bows, which are arguably the finest in Tamriel. While some have described the Dominion as an alliance of mutual convenience, I would characterize it as one of mutual exasperation. Swordsmanship is a case in point. Few Wood Elves have the mental discipline for traditional Altmeri martial schooling. They're easily distracted and have no patience for the philosophical aspects of the training. Altmeri masters, who describe their system of swordsmanship as proper conflict, refuse to adapt their techniques to the smaller stature and shorter reach of their pupils. So the Bosmer return to their traditional method of warfare, archery. By the age of 14, a Wood Elf youth is proficient enough with the bow to accompany hunting parties. Long-distance archers are called Juskspurs. The style of draw used by Juskspurs has been described as snatching and releasing in one continuous motion. This allows them to maintain a very high rate of shooting through years of training are required to be accurate at such speed. The Bosmer are perfectly willing to purchase and use wooden bows and arrows crafted by other races, but the Green Pact prevents them from making any of their own. Traditional Bosmer bows are crafted from horn and sinew. Strings are also made of sinew. Khajiit gut is said to work best, and thus prioritized among Valenwood archers. Bosmeri arrows are carved from bone and fletched with the feathers of various bird species. The Wood Elves believe the source of the bone used influences the characteristics of the arrow. Mammoth bone arrows are thought to strike with enough force to knock down a target. Bird bone arrows fly faster and more accurately. Cinch tiger bone arrows deal extra damage. Trials by Imperial observers have been unable to replicate these alleged effects. Upon hearing this, the Bosmer merely smile and cluck their tongues. I hope you've been enjoying these lore readings, and if you have, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.